Always a pleasure to welcome in Matt Larkin from Daily Faceoff. Amongst many things, you do have your finger on the pulse of the Toronto Maple Leafs, Matt Larkin, and that is where we are digging into things today. Their downturn perfectly timed up with the Mitch Marner drama. How much of a connection are you making there?
I mean, right now, so they've lost 5 of their last 6 games, Tyler. They're not exactly doing a great job dispelling the idea that this was a distraction. And you have to look at that situation and just think, if you had any inkling that Mitch Marner was not going to say yes to waiving that no trade clause, why do you do it? Why do you make that request? It creates this huge distraction. Now it's leaked out. Everyone's talking about it. Even just the idea that the Leafs made a play for Mikko Rantanen at all. If you look at the trade offer that reportedly didn't have Marner, well, if they accept that deal, if that deal goes through, it still pushes Marner out because you're signing Rantanen to an extension. So that is also a distraction. It's been a circus, and to me, they are playing like a team that is, in fact, very distracted.
And look, I will say, Matt, I really liked what they did at the deadline. I thought they, everyone's like, well, they didn't add enough. Well, when you've got the big four, you're adding depth. What are we talking about here? I thought Brandon Carlo and Scott Lawton were perfect additions, but if you're looking to be rescued, you're looking in the wrong place. You've already got the players that are supposed to rescue you, but I want to turn my attention to the goaltending, okay? Because, neither guy has grabbed it and become the every game starter, right? I know Wall had some injuries, but there's been a lot of back and forth and a lot of rotation. When we get to the playoffs, okay, what can we expect out of that position? Are we going to see them go with a rotation in the playoffs?
It's tough. I know that Craig Berube is not a big fan of rotation, and I think even statistically, if you look at the history of Stanley Cup winners, it's usually always best to commit to one guy, not having someone going over his shoulder, looking over his shoulder all the time. And it's tough because it looked like Colby. Anthony Stolarz was pulling away. He had some of the best numbers in the league. And what happens over those last couple of games, crucial games, major important stretch against Florida and Ottawa, he looks mortal. And it's like, oh my God, here we go again. Now, Joseph Woll, who I think looked pretty good against Utah the other day, seems to be pulling even, and it feels like nothing is resolved. We're a month away from the playoffs. I don't think you can go into the playoffs with a situation where it's going to be switching game to game. You need to commit to one guy. But who is it going to be? Joseph Woll was an absolute world beater against the Boston Bruins last year, so we know he has signs of that clutch gene if his body cooperates. At the same time, based on merit, Stolarz has been the better goaltender throughout the year. I think in either case, the Leafs are in a better spot than they've been in recent years with their goaltending. But it also is interesting to me that both guys have looked a little more mortal compared to the first part of the year. And then it's not a coincidence that this team, which depended on the Leafs goaltending, they depended on their goalie so much, they're not doing so well because that was kind of papering over a lot of the flaws.
I'm seeing today, I don't know enough because I'm not following the team on day to know why the fans are frustrated with Craig Berube, but I think it's an interesting conversation. And listen, it's not that much different than one I was having in Edmonton 10 days ago where I was telling people like, hey, if you are calling for another coach to be fired, it is no longer time to look at the coach. It's time to look at the core group of guys and go, how come Tampa Bay and Pittsburgh and they can win all those cups with their star players with the same coach, but you need a fourth, fifth coach now? Maybe walk me through what the frustrations are with Berube, and are they justified? Are they fair? Do you think he can do things differently to improve this team?
It depends on who you're talking to. I think in terms of the culture of frustration with Berube, the Venn diagram of people that were really in the Kyle Dubas camp, I think would overlap there, right? So, because Craig Berube is more of a throwback coach, and he preaches a north-south style, and it's all about simplifying the Leafs game, making fewer mistakes. This is a team that thrives on East-West hockey because they have so much skill. The problem is, if you're making this shift to this new mentality, well, why are you not backing it up with your statistics? The Leafs are not good defensively. So if you've changed your style, you've made your team more conservative offensively, but you're not actually doing a better job defending, then what's the point? I think that's why people are starting to ask the question, do we need to get back to fire wagon hockey? I always joke that the Leafs, when they're down 3-0 in a game, are the 1977 Montreal Canadiens. When they play just kind of wild and free, that's when they're at their best. They've been much more tight in their play this year. The big question for me is, though, why do we have to have this discussion about Berube and litigate it now? What's going to matter is, does this style translate better to the playoffs? That's the big question about the entire season. The Leafs, they don't look great right now, but they are the biggest team in the NHL. They're the biggest team in the league in 7 years, and they have a Stanley Cup winning coach who preaches a simpler game. So will this game, once we get to April, actually translate to better playoff success?
Yeah, and I think one of the frustrations that I picked up on the other night, Matt, was the fact that they switched the lines. They moved Domi up. Domi gets a goal. And then all of a sudden, you're back in the second period and Marner's back up on the first line. And I think people get frustrated and feel like those guys are never held accountable enough. And listen, when you have these superstar players that make all this money and they account for all your salary cap, it's a little bit different. The last thing I have for you, Matt, is I want to ask you about the trade deadline ads. And, you know, I've seen a little bit here and there, but I haven't seen a ton. And I know it's fairly new, but what would you say the early returns individually on Lawton and Carlo have been?
Yeah, I think Carlo has definitely been the more impressive of the two. It's hard to compare positionally, but to me, he's been exactly as advertised. I know people were on about, okay, he was -2 in his first few minutes as a Leaf against Colorado. You can throw that out the window. He's been really strong. The Leafs, the chances when he's out there with Riley, I think it's something like 5-1 high danger chances at 5-on-5. And to me, that's exactly what you hope for, because Morgan Riley always plays well with a big, strong righty, right? Ilya Lyubushkin, Luke Schenn. If you keep him with Brandon Carlo, but that's the thing, Craig Berube, you got to keep Riley and Carlo together. Don't experiment. Keep throwing Oliver Ekman Larson into the mix. Those two are already showing chemistry, and I think that could absolutely solve the second pair problem with the Leafs. So Carlo looks good. Scott Lawton, it's good that he's showing some energy, trying to get a fight in there, even though the team did not respond. It's still early. Again, you're a third liner. It's not like you're going to be putting up huge point totals every night. It's just going to be a matter of, can you find your groove? Can you bring energy at the right time? Can you shut down the opposition's best players? Can you make a mark on the penalty kill? Scott Lawton, I think the jury is more out, and I think it's too soon. A lot of people just like to wring their hands and make passing judgments on Twitter. It's way too soon. Just let these guys gel. Let's see what happens in the playoffs and see if they actually fit. Because on paper, to me, the Leafs went out and got the exact two things they needed. Third line center, right shot deep for the second pair. Perfect job on the shopping list, and you just got to let them settle in.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of teams who will maybe look back at the regular season, and no matter what happens in the playoffs, they'll be like, hey, we still had a good year. These are good building blocks. The Leafs are in the camp of no, they are judged solely on what will happen in April. So never a dull moment, Matt. Appreciate you popping on. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, boys.
What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you need to be hitting the subscribe button right here at Daily Faceoff. Exclusive interviews and analysis from our hockey insider Frank Seravalli, fantasy updates from Brock Sagan, and a daily live show at noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss any of the fantastic content, so hit that subscribe button.